During the early 1970s, the US Army was interested in replacing a few different versions of light and medium utility helicopters they were operating with one consolidated design, and opened bidding for the Utility Tactical Transport Aircraft System competition. Boeing and Sikorsky both submitted proposals, and in 1976, the Sikorsky UH-60A Black Hawk was chosen to fill the tender. As an interesting bit of trivia, the H-60 family is one of the few American military vehicles named for someone who actually fought against the United States in combat, which is a pretty big show of respect to Black Hawk, who was a Native American war chief in the early 1800s. Anyway, the new helicopter started to enter service in mid-1979 after some of the early issues were worked out, and it quickly proved to be highly adaptable to a variety of different missions. Throughout the 1980s, the Black Hawk was modified and upgraded to serve as a troop transport, medevac, VIP transport, and even battlefield reconnaissance. Well, it wasn't long before US Special Forces put their eyes on the Black Hawk and procured some low-rate specialty production models. In the late 80s, Army Special Forces started phasing in the MH-60L, which featured a FLIR system, a laser target designator, additional fuel, and other classified upgrades. The MH-60L Direct Action Penetrator is a further modified version that can serve as a dedicated gunship to provide escort and direct fire support for the regular MH-60Ls and Special Forces units that are already on the ground. The DAP has a set of stub wings with pylons for anti-tank missiles, gun pods, and other payloads, as well as classified upgrades to its sensor systems. Notably, a pair of special model MH-60s were used in the raid to kill Osama bin Laden, but the exact details of those helicopters and the upgrades they had are still classified, and all the stuff you read online about it is 99% speculation. Overall, the Black Hawk family of helicopters has become highly successful, and it still flies for several dozen countries around the world. What we get in War Thunder is the MH-60L DAP, an attack helicopter in Rank 7 of the American Tech Tree at Battle Rating 11.3. In this video, I'm specifically covering the American Black Hawk, as the one in the Israeli tree has different weapons and actually flies differently as well. I'll get to that one on its own at some point. The Black Hawk has a fully modern combat system with a CCIP for its weapons, night vision for the pilot, a 63x optical zoom for its auto tracker with thermal sight, countermeasures, and a wideband radar warning receiver with a laser warning receiver and a missile approach warning system. Oh, and it's got an IRCCM module on its back up behind the rotors. For loadouts, the MH-60 has pylons for mounting unguided rockets, various gun pods, air-to-air missiles, anti-tank missiles, and laser-guided rockets. In practice, the gun pods aren't going to do a whole lot for you, and actually destroying targets at this tier can be difficult, but they're still pretty useful for scouting and forcing repair cycles, especially on lighter vehicles. The air-to-air missile it gets is the AIM-92 Stinger, also known as the ATAS. These are all-aspect infrared missiles with fairly good performance, but they're still fairly short range. You can take 2 at a time per hardpoint. The primary anti-tank missile is the AGM-114K Hellfire. If you're good at manually pinpointing weak spots with a laser designator, these can one-shot a lot of targets on a clean impact. But if you let the auto-tracker just go center of mass, sometimes they might take a few hits against more heavily armored MBTs and stuff. Lastly, the Black Hawk can take 2 versions of the AGR-20. These are laser-guided rockets that come in HE and semi-armor-piercing HE versions. The AGR-20 is kind of an oddball weapon. They're laser-guided, but they can't steer too far off of the direction you fire them. They don't hit very hard, but the trade-off is that you can take a lot of them. So even if it might take 3 or 4 of them to pop a target, you've probably got enough for multiple engagements. I've personally never had good luck with these, but some people swear by them. Try them out a few times and see if you can make them work. In terms of flight performance, the Black Hawk is a little unusual. Remembering that this is a utility helicopter at its core, it feels a little heavy on the controls, and it isn't anywhere near as agile as some of the dedicated attack helicopters we have. The Collective seems to lag about a second behind from the usual feel, and in general it's a little slow to gain altitude even in a flat hover. None of this is really bad or anything, it's just different from the other helicopters that you might have experience with up at this tier. And when I started flying this, it took me about half a dozen missions to really get the feel for it. On the upside, it's still reasonably fast and it accelerates pretty well in level flight, even if its absolute top speed is still a little slower than most of the other top tier helis. It's also fairly easy to fly after you figure out the quirks, and in forward flight, it handles bank turns almost like a regular airplane. It's hard to describe, but it feels very natural, and in general, this helicopter has good mobility despite its shortcomings. It's also worth mentioning that this is, obviously, a fairly large helicopter, and it doesn't have any armor. Now, combined with its wide front profile, it's pretty easy to shoot down. When you take this out in a close air support sorties, I'm going to start off by saying this. Always, always, always take at least 2 Stinger missiles. The opportunity for shots on other helicopters or low-flying aircraft is going to come up more than you expect at the top tiers, and the air-to-air kills that I'm showing in this review are only a small fraction of the ones I recorded. It's also worth a reminder that the Hellfires and the AGR-20s are at least semi-viable for attacking helicopters, but they're much easier to dodge than the AIM-92 Stingers. Now, even with that said, your primary role is going to be attacking ground units. The normal high-tier helicopter meta still applies with the Black Hawk, and you'll want to try and do the standoff missile attacks with the Hellfires whenever possible. You can take an enormous load of the things, so don't hesitate to take some risky or unsure shots on targets that are like ducking in and out of cover or something, because you've got plenty more ammo to fall back on, and it's worth the shot. Although I do want to give the usual disclaimer about the Hellfires. If you don't know where the weak spots are on your target, or if you just can't target them reliably, or maybe if you're relying on the auto tracker because you're under SAM attack and you gotta dodge and weave from the external view or whatever, it might take multiple hits to actually destroy a target. On a good hit, the 114Ks can pop a tank as good as any other missile at the top tier, but if they don't land on a weak spot, you'll probably have to send another one in. Maybe another 2. I can't really recommend this one for rocket rushes, mostly because it's just so easy to shoot down, even with light machine gun fire. But if you must try, it does have the CCIP for its rockets and the 30mm cannon pods. In PvE battles, the MH-60L does okay, mostly thanks to the huge quantity of Hellfires it gets. It can be frustrating to try and get out ahead of all the KA-50s and 52s that are cleaning up the ground targets, but if you try and pre-position yourself where the clusters of targets are going to spawn, and then you just wait a minute, you can still mop up some pretty good scores in the PvE mode. Lastly, try not to forget that if you leave the countermeasures slaved to the MAW system, it can dump your entire supply on just one missile. So be careful about that. Visually, I think the gunship version of the Black Hawk looks pretty badass, but the above-behind camera angle we get in the game is a little odd. This is one of the few helicopters with top-mounted stub wings, which gives it a very flat-looking profile from above. No custom paint jobs or anything, but the solid black Special Ops skin still looks good. Landing this one is easy, and despite being a wheeled helicopter, it doesn't roll around or drift very much after touching down. No special caveats for landing the Black Hawk. To close out on the MH-60L DAP. This helicopter carries a huge load of weapons. It's got a full set of modern defensive systems, and you can get into it for a fairly low spawn point cost. However, it's pretty easy to shoot down. The final verdict on the Black Hawk in the US tree is that this helicopter is a bit of a glass cannon, more so than other top-tier helis. It has good offensive punch, but it gets swatted out of the air very easily. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.